History is written by the winners. But the records don't always tell the whole story. Sometimes the truth is traded for a convenient lie. What if I told you that he didn't die in 1945? At the Nuremberg trials, one pretty important defendant was missing, and I mean the big one. All through the war, millions of people around the world were dreaming about seeing this guy swing from a rope. I'm talking about Hitler. Getting your hands on the man who kicked off World War II. That was the dream. Whether you were a politician sitting in some fancy office or just a regular soldier in a muddy trench, everybody figured it'd be the very first thing on the to-do list once the war was over. But somehow, the Führer of the Third Reich slipped away. The official story says he killed himself. The unofficial story, he pulled off an escape to South America, just like a whole bunch of other high-ranking Nazis did. Fast forward to April 30th, 1945. Russian troops have already smashed their way into Berlin. The Reichstag is being stormed. Hitler knows the game is up. He's already written his will. He knows what happened to his buddy Mussolini. The partisans grabbed him, strung his body up in a public square next to his girlfriends, and hung them both upside down by the ankles. So yeah, Hitler knows he's looking at the same ending, maybe even worse, and he wants to go out on his own terms. His last hideout is this place called the Führer bunker, basically a complex of underground rooms sitting about 16 feet below the garden of the Reich Chancellery. The Nazi inner circle had been holed up down there for 4 months already. Hitler's got Eva Braun with him, his longtime girlfriend. On April 29th, he finally makes it official and marries her. Then on the 30th, at 2:30 in the afternoon, the two of them lock themselves in his study. A little while later, his valet walks in and finds them both dead. The official timeline of what happened before and after this suicide is nailed down pretty much minute by minute. There are eyewitness accounts from people who were actually there. Hitler's adjutant helps the valet carry the bodies out into the garden. They douse them with gasoline. The canister was ready to go ahead of time. They light a match. First try doesn't catch. So they grab a torch made from a rolled-up bundle of papers and documents nobody needed anymore. Meanwhile, artillery shells are dropping all around them. They put what's left in a bomb crater and shovel some dirt on top. Later on, 2 more bodies show up right there, 2 German shepherds. The dogs had been poisoned and laid next to their owner. What happened next we know from Soviet documents that got declassified back in 1980. On May 2nd, Soviet forces take the Reich Chancellery and the bunker. They find blood on the couch in Hitler's study. A few days later, they dig up some unidentified remains from that crater. The stuff gets sent off for forensic analysis, and based on fragments of the jaws and the skull, they make an ID, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun. And this is where things start getting weird. Those remains get reburied a bunch of times, and then eventually, they get completely destroyed. The only pieces they keep are a chunk of the skull with a bullet hole in it, and the jaw. Supposedly the jaw is sitting in the FSB archives right now, and the skull fragment with the hole is in the State Archive. The whole thing was kept so hush-hush that the Americans immediately had plenty of reasons to be skeptical. Some researchers actually think the Soviet Commission never found any bodies at all, and that the whole autopsy and reburial story just disinformation. Obviously, a story like this was going to attract every conspiracy theorist out there. No body, no case, right? But here's the thing, the jaw is real. It got identified by 2 people. First, Hitler's personal dentist's assistant, and second, his dental technician. And the matter was finally put to bed by French forensic scientists in 2018. They compared the jaw to Hitler's dental x-rays from 1944. As for the skull, now that one's got a lot of question marks around it. The story goes that the frontal bone is way too thin for a grown man, which would mean either Hitler was actually a woman under 40, or the skull just isn't his. And beyond that, a lot of folks just couldn't wrap their heads around such a massive historical figure going out in such a mundane way. Like, really, he just shot himself and that's it. But if Hitler didn't die, then whose remains ended up in that crater behind the Reich Chancellery? And where did the Führer of the Third Reich actually go? July 1945. Joseph Stalin and US Secretary of State James Burns are having a casual chat. Both of them are trying to keep things light and informal. Burns asks him, straight up, "So, is Hitler done?" Stalin answers, "He's not dead. He escaped to Spain, or maybe Argentina." Burns later wrote about this whole exchange in his memoirs. He didn't mention whether Stalin was joking or being dead serious. 7 years after that, President Dwight Eisenhower admits that the US has not been able to find any solid proof that Hitler actually died, and he says it's entirely possible the Führer did slip out of Berlin. Both sides are keeping their investigation files stamped classified, and wherever there's stuff nobody's saying out loud, you get rumors, speculation, and conspiracy theories. Another piece of ammunition for the conspiracy crowd. The so-called rat lines. These were secret escape routes for Nazis, and the people organizing them, the Vatican. That's how tons of war criminals got away. Take Dr. Death, Aribert Heim, the guy who tortured prisoners at the Mauthausen concentration camp. He lived out a nice peaceful life in Cairo under the name Tariq Farid Hussein. Or Joseph Mengele, the angel of death from Auschwitz. Or Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust. They all escaped to South America and lived pretty comfortable lives down there. So if those guys pulled it off, why couldn't Hitler? There are a few main conspiracy theories floating around about what happened to him. They all share the same basic plot. Hitler gets away and dies of natural causes somewhere far from home. But after that, the theories go in all kinds of directions, from pretty believable to completely off the wall. Here's one version. Hitler escapes, and what died in the bunker was actually a body double. The basis for this is a weird find in the Reich Chancellery garden, a corpse with a bullet hole in the forehead and that instantly recognizable moustache. And they ID'd the guy as Gustav Weyler, who according to some accounts really did work as one of Hitler's body doubles. Conspiracy theorists figure there were several of these toothbrush moustache guys running around, and they point to a book called The Strange Death of Adolf Hitler as their smoking gun. That book came out in America back in 1939. The author was anonymous, supposedly a Nazi officer, and he claimed the real Hitler had been poisoned way back in 1938, and that ever since then, 4 different doubles had been standing in for him depending on the occasion. At the time, people treated the book like a dumb joke. But then in '45, they actually found a double's body, and suddenly the story of those charred bones in that bomb crater starts looking a whole lot more interesting. And then there are the more exotic versions. Most of them actually have a pretty specific source. They're all based on loose interpretations of a book called The Morning of the Magicians, which came out in 1960. It was written by Jacques Bergier, a French resistance fighter, an amateur alchemist, and just an all-around champion of tall tales. The Morning of the Magicians is a pseudo-scientific deep dive. It claims the Nazis belonged to these secret societies and occult organizations where they learned ancient mysteries. And Hitler, the most respected of them all, obviously couldn't just die on some boring couch in a bunker. The tabloids grabbed this idea and ran with it. One of the craziest versions claims the Nazis made contact with the residents of Agatha, a country populated by a race of superhumans. Supposedly, way back in ancient times, these superhumans went and hid underneath the Earth's surface, and only the worthiest humans get to enter their halls, like, say, Hitler. The laziest conspiracy theorists claim the entrance to Agatha was literally right there in the bunker, and it was basically zero effort for Hitler to just slip through. The more sophisticated ones say the Nazis opened up a gateway to Agatha in Antarctica, in a place called New Swabia. Nazi Germany actually did have an Antarctic territory that they named New Swabia, but the mission down there was really mundane. They just wanted to claim the land and build a whaling base. Whale oil was a big deal back then, used for making margarine and soap, which, yeah, not nearly as exciting as fantasizing about some Arctic fortress where the Nazis are stockpiling occult artifacts and plotting the rise of the Fourth Reich. One version of the theory says Hitler was delivered to New Swabia by submarine. And as proof, they dig up this quote from Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz of the Third Reich. The German submarine fleet is proud to have built an impregnable fortress for the Führer on the other side of the world. How reliable is that quote? In classic conspiracy fashion, not at all. There's another version, which is basically a cornerstone of what they call Esoteric Hitlerism. that says Hitler made it to his Arctic base on a flying saucer. If that sounds insane, yeah, it's absolutely bonkers. Esoteric Hitlerism is basically this new age kind of religion. It was founded by a French writer named century.Did and a Chilean diplomat named Miguel Serrano. They declared that Adolf Hitler was a literal incarnation of the god Vishnu, and that in 1945 he suffered just a temporary setback. But he's definitely coming back on his fleet of flying saucers to establish an Aryan world order. And then there's yet another version with flying saucers in it. The story about Hitler heading off to a Nazi moon base. Now, according to some accounts, the Nazis actually might have been working on their own flying saucers, experimental disc-shaped aircraft. Giuseppe Belluzzo, a former member of Mussolini's government, talked about this, and so did some lesser-known German engineers. Plus, as we learned from the Morning of the Magicians, the Nazi upper crust had access to secret knowledge. So these Nazi flying saucers could use magical vril energy to get Hitler all the way to a lunar base specifically built for that purpose. You can't see it through a telescope because, you guessed it, it's on the dark side of the moon. Unfortunately for this theory, the very first mention of a Nazi moon base actually comes from a short story by sci-fi writer Robert Heinlein. And the US space program, which was literally built by former Nazi engineers, still hasn't managed to colonize the moon. So you can go ahead and cross that one off the plausible list. The more time that passed after Hitler's supposed death, the more creative and flat-out strange the conspiracies got. But really, only one version deserves serious attention. Hitler, like a lot of Nazis, might have escaped to Argentina. And like a lot of Nazis, he might have lived a long, happy life down there. Argentina was a fan of the Germans, and they rolled out the red carpet for them. So it's no surprise that after the war, that's exactly where the flood of refugees headed, and some pretty notorious war criminals were in that crowd. Some of these guys were useful to the Western powers as specialists, others just showed up with suitcases full of cash. And President Juan Perón of Argentina was right there, actively welcoming these distinguished guests. The Soviet Union had evidence of Hitler's death in their hands, so they weren't out there hunting for him. But the CIA, and especially the FBI, did actually look into the most credible leads. Those files got declassified relatively recently, much to the delight of the conspiracy crowd. One of the earliest known reports is the story of an Adolf Hitler. The archived file is literally just one photograph and one short report from a CIA informant. Back in 1955, the agent met a guy named Philipp Citroen, who claimed to be a former SS officer. Citroen bragged about his amazing personal connection with Hitler himself, who, according to him, was now living in Argentina under a fake name. The informant didn't buy it, so Citroen whipped out a photograph. In the photo, Citroen is sitting next to an older man with that recognizable mustache and hairstyle. On the back of the photo, there was a name, Adolf Hitler. Based on the report, the CIA agent couldn't dig up any leads and the case was closed. But way more interesting files ended up in conspiracy theorists' laps after the FBI declassified their stuff. In July of '45, an FBI informant got tipped off about a man who claimed to be an Argentine government official. This diplomat said he was one of 4 people who personally met Hitler and his entourage on the Argentine coast. He agreed to tell the whole story, on one condition: they had to guarantee he wouldn't get extradited back to Argentina, where a coup had just gone down. And here's the picture that came out. Just a couple weeks after Berlin fell, 2 submarines show up in Argentina. There were about 50 people on board, the elite of the German National Socialist Party. And one guy stood out, a man in his mid-50s. He was with a woman, clearly his wife, and a handful of officials. The man complained that during the voyage, his asthma and stomach ulcers had flared up. Above his upper lip, you could see stubble from a mustache that had been sloppily shaved off. A very specific shape of mustache. The informant swore he recognized the guy as Adolf Hitler. The delegation got put on horses and sent off to the nearest town. The source said he knew where Hitler and his 2 body doubles were living. It was a house way out in the countryside, with a hidden door that opened into a bunker. The informant promised he had tons more details to share, and then he vanished without a trace. He left the FBI with nothing but vague descriptions and theories that weren't any better than what you'd read in a tabloid. In the final report to Hoover, The agent concludes that you can't rule out the possibility that Hitler and Eva Braun escaped from Berlin the day before Russian forces rolled in. But, in his opinion, Argentina was a long shot. The Führer didn't speak any foreign languages, and it would have been tough for him to keep a low profile down in South America. The agent thought a more likely destination was Switzerland. Whether the FBI actually followed up on that, still unknown. The hunt for Hitler's trail in South America is still going on to this day, and it's expanded way beyond Argentina. Now Brazil, Paraguay and Chile are all in the running to be his final resting place. They'll probably start looking on the moon too. You know, once we actually get up there.